profiles are applied. We have, as always, a couple of reasons why you want to check that. But one most common use case is, let's assume that you deployed a setting or maybe a whole session to your endpoint and nothing happens. A use case that I didn't cover in the tutorial because it's more related to licenses, and that's the reason why I'm putting it here in the overview. Never forget that if you are assigning a session to your endpoint and no sessioning is popping up on the device, it's highly valuable that you don't have a valid Workspace Edition license on that endpoint. The device will stay functional. You can shadow the device. You can do a lot of stuff like opening a terminal, but you can't open a Citrix, ADP, AVD, browser session or whatever. That's the reason why you need a license. So that's another topic. But on profiles in general, you want to see if a profile that you assigned, let's say the day before, or maybe just now to the endpoint, is reaching out to devices. You might also have a situation where a customer or a user of yours is reporting that the setting that you should have applied the day before or just a couple of seconds ago didn't reach the device. So you want to check if the device is already holding the last configuration set that is wanted. Even on that, you might have a situation also where you deployed a setting the day before or next reboot, and you are not sure if the device retrieved that setting. That's what we are covering today. And last but not least, even if it's not exactly the use case of seeing if a setting was applied or not, I will show you how to check which UMS server is holding your device. Let's assume that you are deploying a new UMS server and you're wondering why a couple of devices couldn't be registered in your new UMS. It's highly risky that you have already another UMS server on your network. Like in every tutorial, we are looking at the Universal Management Suite, also known as UMS. Today, I will show you how to get a better overview about which setting reached your device. So basically, you already know that you can assign a setting via a profile or local configuration via a master profile or a template key. Let's stay on the standard level and saying you assigned a profile and you want to check if the setting reached out to the device. So let's assign something to the endpoint and assign it now. First thing I would like to show you, because it's sometimes helpful to see if there is maybe a network or a certificate error, you have this little expand symbol in the bottom of your UMS console, which allows you to show this status bar. The status bar will show you the last comment that you sent to the device and the result of it. So basically, if you would have here something like end of stream or an error 404 or whatever, in red, it would mean that the setting couldn't be applied to the endpoint because maybe of some network issues, it couldn't reach the device via the TCP port 30005. That's the first one. Second one, if you didn't click now, but maybe on next reboot, you might notice that you have a little blue eye like information on your endpoint. That means that a specific configuration wasn't retrieved from the endpoint since the last time it booted. But here on my actual device, it's online and sent now, and basically on my endpoint nothing changed. But how can I now check if that configuration arrived? Easiest way, in my opinion, is to open the profile that you assigned. Check there in which part of the configuration you changed something. So we have here predefined variables. And do the same now from the UMS side, but for the local configuration of the endpoint. So basically what we're opening here is more or less what you are seeing locally on the IGEL OS platform if you open the IGEL setup. There is a small difference if the endpoint hadn't the chance to write back the configuration to the database, but that's maybe less than 1% of support cases. So edit configuration will now bring us to our configuration of the endpoint, and now we are going back, thanks to the blue color, to firmware customization, environment variables predefined, and we see now that values arrive there. So our profile should have to reach the device. Now you might already have, let's say, concurring profiles that might change that value already, and you're not sure which profile reached the device. And assuming that the other profile is already assigned to the endpoint itself, so it's already the highest priority possible. If you go with your mouse on the log symbol and just stay there, you will get a notification about overwritten by profile conditional reboot. So that's exactly the profile you have to look for in your profile tree to see where the setting was made. But that looks pretty good, so the configuration reached the device. Just if you want to be sure to 100%, but that's absolutely optional, you can go to your local endpoint, go to IGEL setup. If you have set up an administrator password, enter it here, and if not, it will go through, and you can go there to System, Firmware Customization, Environment Variables Predefined, and like you expected there. The only thing that you don't have here, because you're not in the UMS, you don't have that balloon tip which is showing up, telling you which profile is assigned. But basically it's there. So now you might ask, okay, but even that I know now that the profile was assigned, I would like to know when it was assigned, or maybe by whom. Just because it might be a misconfiguration or maybe a misunderstanding in the configuration profile creation process in your company. So for that purpose we have, which is so-called the logging feature, which is already covered by another tutorial, by logging messages. There you see which kind of comments was sent from the UMS to the endpoint to which moment. It's not enabled by default, so let me just jump back to the UMS administration, there to logging, and here the log messages, event settings, and performance log. Just in case, like I said, it's already covered by another tutorial, so I will not dig extremely deep into the topic, but just saying if you want to have the actual username also logged in that window, you have to check that box. So now we know that the network configuration seemed to work. Then we ensure that by opening the local configuration from the UMS. Then we open the local configuration in the IGEL setup of the endpoint, and we also checked the UMS login. So if you want to have the last check made from the UMS side, you could also go to the event messages and check what kind of feedback the endpoint gave back to the UMS. Okay, so get setting from database was processed like expected, and yeah, looks good. I mean, nothing else to see here in this specific case, so we should be good. So now you might ask yourself, why should I do that? Like I said, just because sometimes you have maybe lost the overview about who created and assigned which setting to which moment, or if you assigned maybe a profile 2 weeks ago and you are not sure how the actual state is, that's how we check it. Just a small hint on the UMS side, since 607, if I remember right, you can create a view which is unretrieved settings. And you can now create a configuration change pending view and check which devices in UMS didn't recover a setting that you assigned in a profile. So basically you are getting all the devices with a blue eye. So now let's come to the what I would call the masterclass of retrieving settings, but now from the endpoint side. Let's imagine the following. You have set up a new UMS, maybe on a customer side because you are a reseller or partner of us, or maybe by yourself in your own lab, and you're wondering why a device that you just registered or that you are seeing on the network isn't able to be configured by your UMS. Making a chart, you have different possibilities, network, firewalls, etc. But there is also some last thing that you might consider. You might have already another IGEL UMS somewhere on your network which took over the device. So for that purpose, you could, in the original UMS, assuming you would have an access, check under remote management, under UMS server, which UMS server is, let's say, holding that device in his configuration set. But that's not such easy, because usually if you didn't know that there is a UMS, it's highly inconsistent that you will have an access to that UMS. So if you have access to the endpoint, you could do the following. Accessing the device via SSH, assuming you are allowed to, or if you have an access to the local IGEL setup, I mean, besides the way that you can reset the device to factory defaults, no questions, but sometimes you might have an IGEL RM server or DHCP option 224, which will grab the device faster than you could. So I'm opening a local terminal, logging in as root, and now, like I said, via SSH is maybe something which is more recommended, but you can do that locally. Remember that we have a specific path for every setting in the graphical user interface, and that everything that you are seeing here is stored in our so-called registry. So for that purpose, I have something under System, Remote Manager, Server Null, IP. So that's basically the information that I can retrieve from the registry. So now it would be extremely helpful if I could just take over that value and maybe grab it from the command line. So get is our command to read a specific value from our registry in a specific path. And now we are seeing our IP address of the UML that is holding that device. If in the worst case scenario where we have high availability network on your network and you didn't know that, you can have more than one server obviously in that list. But let's stay in the standard way, and if you want to be sure, you could say server 1. If no value is given back, then you are, let's say, highly sure that it's just a single instance of UMS. So you can now say, let's search on the network for that UMS server, and if not needed anymore, disable it, shutting down the device or whatever. So that's my last approach to retrieve a setting from the endpoint. Thank you for joining our technical video session. All links mentioned in this session are available in the show notes section of this video. You will find more technical content and other videos on igelcommunity.com and IGEL Academy learn.igel.com.